Have you noticed how politics today feels more toxic than ever? How neighbors, friends, even family are divided, and not just by ideas, but by anger, distrust, and hostility. The US political divide isn't just growing, it's deepening in a way that threatens democracy, social peace, and the future. Today, we'll look at where we were before, what's changed, and most importantly, why, and examine what this means for the future. Let's unpack the truth behind America's political divide. Historically, people disagreed politically, but often still trusted or respected opponents more. Ideological consistency was weaker. Some studies show Americans used to mix more socially across party lines. Moderates were a larger share. As recent Gallup data shows, moderates used to make up a significant portion of the public. Fewer people identified strongly as very liberal or very conservative. This large moderate bloc served as a political anchor, encouraging compromise. Parties were less sorted. The Democratic and Republican parties contained wider ideological ranges, less alignment with strongly held social identity markers. In other words, being a Republican or Democrat didn't carry the strong social, cultural, or moral meaning it tends to now. There was a time, not so long ago, when political disagreement was a feature of a healthy democracy, not a bug. Debates were robust, but generally confined to the halls of power or the opinion pages. But that has changed dramatically. The temperature has been turned all the way up, and the friction is now everywhere. Today, we see it in our town halls and on our streets, in partisan clashes that feel less like debates and more like battles. We see it in the endless news clips of arguments where scoring points has replaced the pursuit of understanding, and we feel it in our personal lives, scrolling through social media feuds that sever friendships and strain family bonds. This isn't just politics as usual. It's a fundamental shift in how we relate to one another, a great widening of the chasms that separate us. At the heart of this shift is a phenomenon political scientists call affective polarization. This isn't about disagreeing on policy. It's about disliking people. It's the difference between saying, "I think your tax plan is flawed," and "I think you as a person are a threat to the nation." The emotional animosity we feel towards those on the other side is rising to unprecedented levels. People don't just disagree. Many now believe the other side is not merely wrong, but immoral, dishonest, and a danger to the country's well-being. The data is stark. According to the Pew Research Center in 1994, fewer than 20% of Republicans or Democrats had a very unfavorable view of the opposing party. Today, that number has more than tripled. This animosity bleeds into daily life, influencing who we're willing to date, befriend, or even have as a neighbor. Fueling this emotional divide is the decline of the ideological middle. For decades, the American political landscape had a large, stable center. Many Americans identified as moderates, and the parties themselves had more ideological diversity. There were liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, but that common ground has been eroding for years. Data from Gallup shows a steady decline in the proportion of Americans who identify as moderate. Simultaneously, more and more people are clustering at the ends of the ideological spectrum. This isn't just a matter of labels, it reflects a deeper sorting. The parties have become more ideologically pure, more distinct from one another than at any time in the last century. As the middle vanishes, the space for compromise and cross-partisan understanding disappears with it, leaving two distinct camps with little common language. Layered on top of this ideological sorting is a powerful new cleavage in American society, the diploma divide. Historically, your level of education was not a strong predictor of your political party, but today it is one of the most significant dividing lines. A profound realignment has occurred. Voters with a college degree, and especially those with postgraduate degrees, have moved decisively into the Democratic camp. Meanwhile, voters without a college degree have become the bedrock of the Republican Party. This divide is about more than just policy preferences. It reflects diverging economies, cultures, and geographies. It pits urban, knowledge-based economies against rural and post-industrial communities, creating a sense of cultural and economic anxiety that politicians are quick to exploit, further deepening the division and adding another powerful current to the river of polarization. And all of this is amplified by a media ecosystem that has been completely transformed. The era of 3 broadcast networks and a shared set of facts is a distant memory. Today, we live in a fractured media landscape with hundreds of cable channels, websites, and podcasts tailored to every ideological niche. Social media algorithms designed to maximize engagement, learn our biases, and feed us content that confirms them, creating powerful echo chambers. Inside these filter bubbles, our own views are constantly reinforced, while the views of the other side are either absent or presented in their most extreme and threatening form. This constant exposure to a distorted caricature of our opponents amplifies anger and misperceptions. It convinces us that the other side is not just wrong, but dangerously radical, making compromise seem like an act of surrender. This polarization in the public inevitably reflects itself in our government. In our institutions, elected officials are more ideologically rigid and partisan than ever before. Political scientists who track voting patterns in Congress have documented a dramatic pulling apart of the two parties over the last 50 years. The number of moderates who could bridge the gap has dwindled to near zero. This legislative polarization leads to the gridlock and dysfunction we see today, where even routine tasks of governing become battlegrounds for partisan warfare. It creates a vicious cycle. A polarized public elects polarized politicians who then govern in a polarized manner, which in turn further enrages and divides the public. The result is a government that struggles to address the nation's most pressing problems and a political system that feels fundamentally broken. So, how did we get here? What forces are pulling us apart with such intensity? Several key reasons emerge from recent research, and the first is a phenomenon known as partisan sorting, which is deeply connected to our sense of social identity. Now, this isn't necessarily about millions of people changing their core beliefs. Instead, it's about people physically and socially moving to be with others who already share their political worldview. Over the past few decades, Americans have increasingly chosen to live in communities, join social clubs, and even choose partners who align with their political party. This creates politically homogeneous environments, but it goes deeper than just geography. Psychologists explain this through social identity theory, which posits that we derive a significant part of our self-esteem from the groups we belong to. As other traditional identities like local community or union membership have weakened, political affiliation has rushed in to fill the void. For many, being a Democrat or a Republican has become what's known as a mega identity, an all-encompassing identity that aligns their race, religion, geography, and ideology under a single partisan banner. When this happens, a political disagreement is no longer just a debate about policy. It's perceived as a personal attack on who you are, on your tribe, and on your very sense of self. The second major driver is the rising prominence of cultural and moral issues. For much of the 20th century, the main political battles were fought over economics, questions of taxes, regulation, and social spending. While contentious, these are fundamentally negotiable. You can compromise on a tax rate. But in recent decades, the central conflicts have shifted to issues like race, gender, sexuality, and immigration. These aren't easy to compromise on because they are intrinsically tied to our deepest moral beliefs and our vision for what constitutes a just and good society. These issues are often framed as sacred values. When a political stance is elevated to the level of a sacred value, like protecting the unborn, ensuring absolute equality for marginalized groups, or defending traditional religious views, any form of compromise can feel like a profound moral failure, a betrayal of your core principles. This transforms the political arena from a place of negotiation into a battlefield of right versus wrong. It creates a zero-sum conflict where one side's victory is inherently the other side's defeat. If one group gains rights and recognition, another group may feel that their own status, culture, and way of life are being diminished or erased. There is no middle ground on a sacred value. This brings us to our third factor: information silos. The media landscape has fractured beyond recognition. Where once most Americans received their news from a handful of trusted broadcast networks, we now exist in a vast, fragmented ecosystem of 24-hour cable news, talk radio, and most importantly, social media. This has given rise to echo chambers and filter bubbles. The algorithms that power platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok are designed for one primary goal: to keep you engaged. And they've learned that the best way to do that is to show you content that validates and reinforces what you already believe. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. We are fed a steady diet of information that confirms our biases, while being shielded from opposing viewpoints. Over time, this not only strengthens our own convictions, but also paints a distorted and often monstrous caricature of the other side. We largely consume media that confirms our worldview, and we're trained to view the other side's media not just as biased, but as fundamentally dishonest, as fake news. The result is that we are no longer operating from a shared set of facts. When one side's reality is completely divorced from the other's, constructive debate becomes nearly impossible. Fourth, we have the role of polarized political elites and institutions. While it's easy to blame the public, political leaders and the very systems of our government play a huge role in driving us apart. As political elites, politicians, media figures, and party activists become more polarized, they set the tone for the rest of the country. They often find that fiery, divisive rhetoric is more effective for fundraising and mobilizing their base than calls for unity and compromise. The rise of ideological primary elections means that politicians are often more afraid of a challenge from their party's extreme flank than they are of losing to the opposing party in a general election. This incentivizes purity over pragmatism. This polarization is then baked into the system itself through institutional factors. Gerrymandering, the process of drawing legislative districts for political advantage, creates safe seats where representatives have no electoral reason to appeal to anyone outside their partisan base. They can ignore the center without consequence. Furthermore, even the mechanics of democracy have become battlegrounds. Politicized voting laws concerning everything from mail-in ballots to voter ID requirements are framed as existential struggles for the future of the country, eroding trust in the electoral process itself. These institutional forces don't just reflect polarization, they actively amplify it. Finally, all of these factors are layered on top of profound social and demographic shifts. The growing urban-rural divide is perhaps the most visible manifestation of this. It's more than just geography, it's a proxy for two different Americas with different economies, cultures, and lived experiences. Densely populated, diverse urban centers are increasingly the hubs of the globalized information economy, while many rural areas feel left behind, their traditional industries hollowed out. Education has also become a powerful political dividing line. A college degree is now one of the single best predictors of how an American will vote. This educational polarization creates different vocabularies and worldviews, making it harder for the two sides to even understand each other's perspectives. Add to this rising economic inequality, which fuels populist anger and ongoing demographic changes, as the nation becomes more racially and ethnically diverse. For some, this change is celebrated as a fulfillment of the American promise. For others, it can feel like a threat to their cultural and social standing, fueling a powerful reactionary politics. These deep, overlapping fissures in our society map almost perfectly onto our political divisions, making compromise feel less like a solution and more like surrender. What does this chasm in our society mean for the future? The implications are tangible and frightening. The most immediate danger is an increased risk of political violence. Polls show a majority of Americans believe harsh political rhetoric directly fuels this risk. When leaders label opponents not as fellow citizens, but as enemies or traitors, they are lighting a fuse. This language strips away the humanity of the other side, making it psychologically easier for individuals to justify aggression. Experts call this stochastic terrorism, public demonization that results in a predictable yet random violent response. Recent attacks against public officials are seen not as isolated incidents, but tragic symptoms of this trend. This politics of dehumanization creates cycles of fear, pushing sides further apart. The fear of violence also has a chilling effect on civic participation, discouraging good people from running for office or speaking out, leaving the field open to those who thrive on conflict. Second, this division fuels democratic erosion. Unlike a sudden collapse, this is a slow, creeping process. It begins when politics becomes a zero-sum battle, where the other side winning is seen as a catastrophe. This mindset justifies abandoning the unwritten rules, the democratic norms that hold the system together. Norms like mutual toleration, the idea that our opponents are loyal citizens, and institutional forbearance, the practice of not using one's full power to crush the opposition, begin to crumble. In the name of partisan victory, anything becomes permissible. We see this in efforts to make voting harder, in the partisan takeover of neutral election rules, and in questioning legitimate results without evidence. Checks and balances are strained as branches of government abdicate their duties or ignore others. History shows democracies can backslide into authoritarianism not overnight, but through this gradual, corrosive process where citizens slowly grow accustomed to a less free and fair system. Third, the division seeps from politics into our social lives, causing social fragmentation. This is affective polarization, a deep emotional dislike of the other side. The data is stark. a decline in cross-party friendships, and an increase in people unhappy if a family member married an opponent. This sorting extends to where we live and what we watch. Social media and cable news algorithms accelerate this, creating echo chambers that confirm our biases and portray the other side as immoral. We end up living in separate information universes with separate sets of facts. This erosion of a shared reality makes conversation, let alone compromise, nearly impossible. It leads to insular communities where our views are never challenged and animosity is reinforced. This breakdown of social trust or social capital is devastating. It's the glue that holds society together, enabling us to cooperate to solve problems and trust our neighbors. Without it, society fractures into warring tribes. And finally, this toxic environment leads to policy gridlock and the rise of extremism. When the two sides view each other as enemies, the common ground for compromise vanishes. The political incentives also shift. For many politicians, the greatest threat is no longer the other party, but a primary challenge from a more extreme member of their own. This primary problem punishes moderation and rewards ideological purity. The safest strategy becomes refusing to compromise, leading to a paralyzed government. This failure to govern creates a vacuum of public frustration. People lose faith in the system's ability to solve their problems. Into this vacuum step the extremists. Radical voices once on the fringes gain appeal by offering simplistic solutions and promising to burn down the corrupt system. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Gridlock fuels anger, which empowers extremists, whose rise deepens polarization and makes compromise impossible. It is a vicious cycle that threatens to leave a fractured and vulnerable nation in its wake. But there are paths forward. We can promote cross-ideological contact, encouraging programs where people can meet and discuss in structured settings. Events like America in One Room show that dialogue can reduce polarization when people are encouraged to listen. We need media literacy and responsible media framing. Platforms and news outlets can reduce sensationalism and avoid framing everything as extreme. We must reinforce democratic norms and institutions, protect election integrity, reduce excessive partisanship, and encourage accountability. And we must encourage personal responsibility and empathy, speaking respectfully, listening to others, and reducing our own echo chambers. And we can consider policy reforms like non-winner-take-all election models, ranked choice voting, and reforming gerrymandering. America's political divide didn't happen overnight. It's part institutional, social, technological, but it's very real and getting worse. It impacts how we speak, vote, and live with each other. But there are paths forward. It won't be easy. But reducing polarization starts with recognizing we once managed disagreement differently, believing it can be done again, and then acting with honesty, empathy, and responsibility. If you learned something new today, drop a like, comment your experience. How have you seen division grow in your community? And subscribe for more Fast Point discussions. Let's bridge the divide together.